All right. So, where we left off from last time is JSON. So, like I said, if you go on your Finder, um, and you go to like your Blueprint demo app, oops, well, this Blueprint demo app, you will see movies.json. And if you just open that, it should open as like a text file or I don't know, in some sort of like text editor on your computer. You'll see like data that is like basically formatted like so. And so yeah, so JSON is essentially just like a format for like how to display data and format it so it's easy for I guess like any application to read. And so JSON is essentially like how most, if not all, like APIs transmit data. And so you're going to be seeing this on like web dev if you're doing web dev or like, you know, here like iOS or Android, etc. And you can just think of it as like a very like embedded, like a very like nested like Python dictionary that defines like a key to like a value, etc., etc. And so all this stuff I pulled from like an API from the moviesdatabase.com or something. And yeah, so it's got a lot of things that we might want to see. All right, so first, in order to parse the JSON, I don't know how much code you guys have written, but if you wanted to parse this just like using pure Swift, it would take like quite a long or quite a ton of code. Right, just like going through like each of the objects and then like taking out the results, etc. It's just like a lot. So what we do instead is we use like a manager, a package that will essentially help us do this. So we don't have to write, so because someone else already did it for us, so we don't have to write like duplicate code. And so the package is going to be called Swifty.json. So in movie table view controller, if you like write import Swifty.json, we'll first tell you that no such module exists, which means we're going to have to add it. So what you have to do is you go to File, you go to Add Packages, and then here is like a quick way to like add Swift packages. And so Swifty.json, I'll just bring it over right now on the screen. But Swifty.json is like essentially like a GitHub project someone like made way back. And so what all you gotta do is I will send this link to the chat, but you just gotta take the URL, which I've just sent to everyone, and let me move this out of the way. You once you're in this package manager, you enter the URL in there, and lo and behold, Swifty.json pops up. So you say add package, and then you're fetching the package, and then right, and you just click add package, and now underneath your project info, you have Swifty.json, and which means this should not be throwing me an error anymore after this finishes building. So, right, yay, now I don't have any errors and this works. All right, just give everyone a second to do that real quickly. Does everyone have Swifty.json installed? Okay. All right, so I'm assuming silence means that everyone's got that. Nice. So right, so now we're gonna actually like pull data from like the website and um get like display that data. And so first we need to like think about how we're going to store this data, like at least temporarily, and how to process it to be displayable, right? And to like essentially put it inside this movie struct, right? And all that. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to File. We're going to go to New File. And we're going to make a Swift file because it's not going to be like a UI class. It's going to be sort of like a backend thing. And we are going to call this movie parser.swift. So if you guys have done any like advanced web dev before or like worked with like APIs, like I'm just gonna basically show you how to do it using Swift. All right, so first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna import Swifty JSON and we are going to pull data from the movies DB endpoint. And really quickly, I don't know how much exposure you guys have had to endpoints, but Nat, do you want to give an overview of like what an API is / like an endpoint?
Oh man, yeah, sure. So an API stands for what it stands for? Application Programming Interface, and basically you can think of it as like a kind of like resource on the internet. And an API has endpoints, which are essentially like URLs that you can visit / send requests to get data back and also send data to. So the most like common example of this is when you go to like any web service like google.com, you're sending like a GET request to that URL and it'll return to you some data, which you see on the screen, which is like a web page or something. And in this case, it's a little like more abstract, but like we basically are sending a request to this like movies server by like just sending a request to that URL, and in exchange, it'll like return to us some data. And there are like there's like a set of rules about like how exactly you like send a GET request or like how to send data over. And like you can like find these in the documentation for like a specific API, but you kind of just have to know that it's a way of like sending and receiving data on the internet.
Yeah, basically what Nat just said. It's a way to like communicate with a server to like get data from them. So you might not even know this, but like each time you like do a Google search, Google is like you're hitting like a Google endpoint, and the endpoint that Google provides will like give like a JSON of like all this search results, whatever. So that's what we're gonna be doing, but with this movie database. So as you can see on my screen here, I'm in movie parser, and what I did was I imported Swifty JSON, and I basically copy and pasted that movie struct I had originally on top of movie table view controller in here instead. And then I'm gonna make a new class of just like movies. And so that's gonna hold like all this movie data, which is essentially an array of type like of movies. And I'm gonna have this image-based URL because on the documentation of the movie DB, which is on the README of this GitHub repo, in case you guys ever read that, if you go like this is what Nat was saying, like you have to like know things, right? And how you know things is by going on like the website, like the documentation, and like finding like, oh hey, if I want like the poster image for the movie, like I have to hit up like this separate endpoint that's defined by like this image URL thing. And so that's where I got this. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this into the chat so you guys don't have to like struggle keeping up with the typing. Cool, so you guys can just copy and paste that in. And all right, so what movie parser, like I've like this is, I guess, another good example of, oh yeah, Nat, can you send the attendance form again?
Yes.
Okay. Right, so this is another example of, I guess like another good coding practice is like, regardless of what language you're coding in, like you might as well just name your files like something like intuitive, like movie parser is gonna parse movies. So yeah, so basically, let's say we're gonna have like a function get data. And so that's gonna ping the endpoint for us to like fetch all the movies that we want to display. And then we're gonna have a function like parse data, which is given data, and there's is actually literally a type called data in Swift. You're going to like put that data in a format. So essentially put data into movie data array, basically. And so this is going to fetch data from URL. Okay. Okay, cool. And so if we go to movie table view controller, well, the first thing is we want the data to be loaded almost like, when we essentially, when the screen is first loaded. So I guess like in which function does that belong to? Which function would I be putting that code in? On movie table view control. Anymore. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we would be doing that in the movie table, in the view did load, because that's going to be called like the first time the view does load. And so let's essentially add some function calls here that will fetch the data. So another good coding practice is just like, instead of like having like a huge chunk of code like fetching your data, right, and like let's say like reloading your page, you can just like put that as like a function. So like whenever someone looks at your code, they'll like not see like a huge chunk of code and be like, what the heck is this doing? Instead, they'll just be like, okay, it's fetching data. Okay, it's reloading page. So yeah, good thing to note as you guys code more. And so what I'd like to define here is like an extension. And so extension is like, I don't know, it's just like an easy way to once again organize your code that Swift was so kind to like make for us developers. But all you gotta do is like just like write extension, like movie, like whatever class you're extending, and you can define like more functions here. And basically it's like an extension of like the original class movie data table view controller. And so you can have like multiple extensions, right? And it's like totally fine. You can have as many as you want. So I think what I like to do is like, for example, I would like put like all like the UI like functions in one extension, and then like maybe like the data fetching and like another, for example, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it helps you like segment your code basically. All right, so we want a function fetch data, and then we also want a function reload page. All right, so first, well, we want to get the data, right? And so the function we're using to get the data is, if we go back to movie parser, it's going to be this get data function. So in fact, we do want to specify a instance of movie parser here. And we are going to let movie parser be movies, right? Because that is the class that we defined. And let's say we want also to hold a variable movie data, right? Because our movies could change. Each time we page, we could reassign new movies. And that's going to hold an empty array of movies. Okay. So then inside fetch data, right, we want to tell movie parser, our movie parser, to get the data, right? And then, well, if you look at movie parser, where are we storing the data? We're storing the data in our array movie data. And so we can say, let's just like transfer the movie data from there into the movie data here. Or sorry, that's not, well, instead we're gonna call, well, I think there's another function I forgot. But yeah, so get movies actually, because we can't actually get this variable because it's private, which means like outside of this class, like outside of like this class declaration, you cannot like access that variable. And that's also good practice in object-oriented programming. It's like this thing known as encapsulation, but basically you don't want to let anyone else touch like your variables, because like what if they change it, right? Then like your function, like everything you define in here could break, right? If like someone changed it in a way that you didn't expect, which is why we use private. So in order to access that, we will define a function, get movies, that will return an array of movies. Oops. And oops, that will just be return movie data. So self.movie data or movie data, but self because, well, it refers to the instance of movies. Okay. So we'll just add a comment to access. So this is like a getter basically to access private variables outside the class. Right. So yeah, so there's that. So now we can call self.movie.data equals movie parser dot maybe I can just call get movies. Yeah, okay. So this just hasn't updated yet. Here we go. So and then all right, so then that should be fetch data and reload page. It's gonna be pretty simple. So actually table views, collection views, they all have like a built-in function reload data. And so that'll just like reload the page essentially. All right, so going back to movie parser. So here, let's go and essentially like start writing some code to get data from a URL. So we're first gonna let guard let path equals bundle dot main. And so we're just gonna be reading off the JSON file from that. And so this is how we access a JSON file inside our direct, like our current directory. So it's gonna be bundle.main.path. So whatever current path I'm in. So for resource of type. So this is going to be a JSON file. And the JSON file is titled movies. And then else return. So right, so this is a good example of safely unwrapping something that may or may not exist. Right, like let's say like movies.json doesn't exist, right? That isn't the case. You know, something would be nil, path would be nil, or like the result of this would be nil. And that's not good because like usually if like your app is running and like an object is null, like you know it'll crash. And so here we like safely unwrap it so that if it is nil, then you just return like nothing and like nothing really happens. Nothing is breaking. Like your app isn't gonna crash. But if it doesn't return anything, it'll just like seamlessly flow on through the rest of the code. So basically, it's more like this is just like if something bad happened, like make it seem like catch that. Otherwise, just if everything else is like, otherwise just like pretend as if nothing happened in the rest of your code. So that's what guard let does. So we'll say file URL with path. So why I'm doing this is if you go into movies.json, so you will see, okay, so I'm getting like the movies JSON file, and then I'm opening, let's see, I think it might be file URL. I'm getting like I'm opening a URL with okay. I don't know if it's the host path. Okay, well, like I'm essentially like opening a URL with that path and making URL object. And so now I'm going to try to, here's like another good example. Like, do you try to get the data in that URL? Otherwise, like print the error. So it's print error. Okay. So we let data equals try data content of contents of URL, and then we try to call parse data on that data. Okay. Right. So I guess like another way you could be tackling this is you could say like let data equals like data contents of URL, right? In which case, if the URL didn't go through, then this would be fine. Or, so, yeah, so it would be, in this case, this is where we would be like something like data equals optional would be equal to that. And so that just like allows handling of like if the data doesn't really exist. But instead we use a try because like, let's say we want to handle the error somehow. In which case we'll like print like what exactly happened. So yeah. And okay, so parse data will actually like process the JSON data, right? And like put it in like the movie data array that we defined up above. So let's once again do that. So we will once again use a do statement because there could be a parsing error. And so if you just write catch, that'll just catch all the errors. But maybe like sometimes you could throw like multiple different types of errors. So let's say the error is like a JSON error. Then we can just write like, then there was like some error decoding the JSON. And so we can like print Swifty JSON. And that'll help us debug. And then like, let's say it could be another error, like a server error or something. And that's like then you can like catch those separate errors. Okay, so another good practice as a developer, so like I said earlier, use documentation. So if we go to that Swifty JSON link, right, so this is the link to that Swifty JSON thing, and as you can see, whoever like is managing this GitHub repo has created like documentation on the bottom as for like how to use this, right? So essentially what I'm going to be doing is going off of this documentation because I don't exactly know how to use a package, but reading that I will. Sorry, there's like huge like winds outside. Give me a sec. So first, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to convert the data we got, right? which is of type data to like of type JSON. So let's say let JSON equals try JSON data. And then this is let's results, let's say equals to JSON at results, right? And so how do I know this? Well, over here basically, right? Like all the results are displayed underneath this key results. This is like also a good example of what you need to do. Like tomorrow, if you're building like your own app and you want to talk to an API, like once again, go through documentation and look at how the data is going to be formatted, because it's not always going to look like this, right? So yeah, so this is just like specific to the movies DB, so don't just like copy and paste, what I'm doing right now and expect it to work for every API. Okay. So right, so more of the story, read documentation. Okay. So if you look, results is an array, right? Like, or it's mapped to like an array of like more objects, more JSON objects. So we want to iterate through this array. So what we're gonna do is this is defined on documentation. So what we're gonna do is go through each element of the array. So this is gonna be index, and this is gonna be like the element. So we're not going to need the index, so we're just using underscore there. It's going to be of type string JSON in data, or sorry, in results. And so let's get the data that we need, right? So if we look at movie view, so what are we displaying? We're displaying title, synopsis, rating, release date, poster. All right. So let's say let title equals movie. It's called original title in the JSON file. So let's do that. Dot string value. And let image be the image base URL, which I also got from the movies DB documentation. And that's going to be poster path dot string value. Oops. Let overview equals movie at overview dot string value, and let release date equals movie release date dot string. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, I think that's all we need, right? Title, image, overview, title. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I need rating. Okay, yeah, so let's get rating too. Let rating equals movie at vote average dot string value. Let's get the genres too, because we might need that later. So movie at genre IDs dot array value dot map. And right, so what map does is essentially takes well, in this case, it'll like go through each of the elements and it'll iterate through like any interval meaning like an array or tuple or something, and then it'll like take a certain part of that and like map it or like define it, put that in genres. So here what I'm saying is like take the first element in genre IDs and like put it in like these genres. And so why do we do that? Because all right, so if you look here, genre IDs is like an array of like numbers where I guess like this number corresponds to like a certain genre, like maybe like horror or something. But yeah. So yeah, this is essentially how we like take an array from Swifty.json and put it into like an array in Swift. Okay. Then, So we then make a new like movie struct object. And how we do that is, well, remember we defined movie struct up top, and it takes some title, rating, synopsis, languages, categories. So actually, let's not do languages. Just do categories. So what we can do is we can just say make this a movie of, and it'll just like conveniently do this for you. Rating. This will be overview. This will be genres, and then we need a release date too. And then we essentially add the new movie that we just processed into the movies we're keeping track of. Okay. So I guess this, now that we wrote documentation, this should be it. Okay. All right. We haven't done anything with the image yet, and I'll go over that later. But so far, anyone have any questions about what we're doing here? It's a little fast. Sorry about that. Okay, so everyone understands how JSON works. And I guess like how I'm parsing through the JSON. Yeah, Joseph.
Wait, how is it like? Do we have to worry about how exactly it's like the code is reading like values from JSON from the JSON file, or do we just need to know how to use JSON?
Right. So do we need to know? Oh yeah. So the latter, right? Because I mean, well, so like I guess like even in like JavaScript or whatever, I think it's like built in like JSON like processing, right? And so if you want to like learn how like exactly how it's reading for the JSON, you can of course look at like that GitHub repo and like see what they're doing. But that's like also the reason why we imported like, and that's also the reason like why people make packages, right? Is so we don't have to keep on redoing like the same things like over and over again. Rather, it's just like black boxing it so that we can, just like import something and like use it. Because like developers would like to focus more of their time like actually like doing useful things with JSON rather than like figuring out how to like parse it like from scratch. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah, I see. But like if we wanted to put in like values into a JSON file, then we would have to like worry about that, right?
Yeah. I think there might be, you can check Swifty JSON, but there might be like ways to like easy ways for like using functions already defined in that package to like make a JSON file and like send that out. So yeah.
Okay.
Like once it's like the answer is you should just read the documentation. Because I don't know, like I'm not like a big expert in Swifty JSON, but they have a lot of functionality that could be useful. Other questions? All right. So if no more questions, Joseph?
Yeah, sorry, I have one more question. So like I know this is like kind of far back, but what was guard exactly used for?
Right. So guard, if you remember from the playground, it's for like safely unwrapping and optional, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying like, all right, like this is like essentially the Python for like os dot like directory dot like current directory or something, like get movies JSON, which is like saying like, like go inside the current directory this file is in and like try to find a JSON file called movies.json, right? And like, well, what if the file doesn't exist, right? Well, then this is gonna be a nil, right? And so guard is saying like, it's like guarding against the possibility that that's a nil. And so if this doesn't exist, for example, movies.json doesn't exist, it'll just exit this function like really early right here, right? And it'll just like return, and like, it'll just, I don't know, like, it just won't crash your app basically. Because if this wasn't here and this file doesn't exist, right, then this variable is going to be nil, like path is going to be nil. So if I were to just like have done this, path could be nil. And while like your app is running and it's like running and it processes like a variable and it's nil, like the first thing it's gonna do is it's gonna like crash because it's not supposed, like you're not supposed to have like null values while you're running the app. Does that make sense? And so like Jack was saying earlier, like this will just protect against the possibility that the app crashes if the file doesn't exist. Okay. Okay. So, going back to movie table view controller, let's just like rerun this and see what's going on. I'm just gonna delete this. Save, and then let's just resume. And hopefully see data. So it ran, it didn't crash, which is good, but we're not seeing anything. Can anyone like maybe think of why? All right. So it's because we are like not like basically setting the data to like inside the cell, inside like DQ usable cell, right? Like that's why we have like config the cell below here. Apple has kindly told us. So we would like to, so we're getting the data. Yeah, so we're just gonna pause this. Right, so we're fetching the data, right? And we are like, and so we're saving like the data into our movie data array inside the table view. So let's like, you know, like actually like access that data and like put it inside each cell we DQ. First, let's get the row, or sorry, the index essentially, or the index path dot row. And let's say let movie equals self dot movie data at that index. Let's set the cell title, right, which is a UI label, and a UI label has a property text. And let's set that to be movie dot title. And then let's set cell dot overview dot text to be movie dot synopsis. And then let's set cell dot rating dot text to be movie rating, movie dot rating, right? And then let's just add like an out of 10 as well, just to make it easier. And then I think we have, do we have a release date? I don't know if we have a release date configured. I don't know if we configured it though. Okay, so right, well I guess we can just say like cell dot release date dot text equals movie dot release date, even though we don't really show it. This should be synopsis. And all right, so we run this. Let's see what happens. Index out of range. Oh no, what does that mean? Oops, that is not. All right, so index is out of range. Does anyone maybe want to Does anyone have like any idea why? For the sake of time, I'll just answer it. But basically for the sake of time, it's because, well, let's print out how many, let's print out like how big movie data is, right? Dot count. And let's just like run this, like actually run it. So yeah, basically you're only gonna see the debugger if you actually run it. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, okay, so Joseph says our files are more than our cells. And yeah, let's see if that's true. Right, okay, well first it says, yeah, so it prints out 0, which means well, our parser isn't working or something. And meanwhile, right, so basically movie data is of length 0, index 0 doesn't exist, etc. So how are we gonna access this data? So first, one thing you can always do to block against that is, instead of setting number of rows in section to just be 10, you can return self.moviedata.count. All right. That's the case. Let's see what happens. Right, well, nothing is being thrown, but it's blank because we don't have any data. So all right. I guess this is a good example of debugging. Okay, so let's try like printing data here and seeing if anything is coming up. And let's print out results here as well. Okay, and then let's try running this again. Because it's not throwing it. It's 50 JSON, which means I don't know if it's because JSON is being registered. There we go. I think it's because I did not add JSON. But yeah, so I think now this should work. Let me just resume. Nice, now we see data. And so that was a good example of why my app wasn't crashing, but like it was still running even though it was showing nothing. Because like it basically tried to find movies.json inside this file directory here, which was null, which means it ended up here, right, inside this return statement. Otherwise, like if it was something to do with like parsing the JSON, I would have gotten like a Swifty JSON error, which didn't happen. So it was essentially just exiting all this stuff early, because movies.json didn't exist yet in the package directory. So now it does, and so now it can like safely essentially unwrap this this like file path, and it can get the contents and it can print out the contents. Let me pause there for a sec. Did everyone understand what just happened? That was kind of fast. Yeah. Joseph.
Oh, I don't think I got 100% of it, but I think you said that essentially it was a no value and then basically ended up at a return, so it wasn't running it. But I don't exactly understand why it was no in the beginning, like how you fixed it.
Yeah. So basically like what this line is doing is it's saying like look for a file called movies.json if it exists. And if it does exist, URL is like, I guess like it's not really a URL, but it's more like the path to that file, right? So if that thing exists, if the path to the file exists, try like decoding that data. But when it was looking for the file, right, it couldn't find it, which means if I were to have just like wrote like let file equals like bundle.main.path, right? Like file would be nil. So file is nil. And like, you know, if you're running your app and it processes like a nil variable, like it'll just automatically crash because that's not supposed to happen. Like, what is it supposed to do afterwards? You know, like, so, I guess one way of guarding against that, let's say, is okay. We could just have done this. This might be easier to understand. So then you can just say like, try unwrapping file. It can be nil, it could not be nil, but let's try unwrapping it. So if it is nil, we return early without crashing the app in the process. Because it's like, okay, we expected this, that it could have not existed. Like the file could have not existed, which is fine. We're not going to crash the app in that case. But if it does exist, then keep on going, essentially. Then just like keep on going and processing like the actual file. Does that make sense?
So is the file being searched from like all the files inside your like Xcode, or is it from your like local device?
I mean, Xcode is on my local device. Like it's specifically looking at everything inside like this current directory, as in wherever my movie parser.swift is.
So why exactly would you still need to guard that if the file already exists there? Like you already know the file exists. Why do you still need?
Right, but like maybe like I don't know the file exists. Like usually like you're not reading, right? Like I don't know, maybe like I did earlier, like I forgot to like drag movies.json into like the actual directory here. And so like I thought I had it, but I didn't. And so it sort of like guards against that possibility as well. I mean, usually like you're not going to be reading like hard-coded JSON files. You're going to be reading it from like API servers. So what if like, I don't know, like someone like messed up in the code or like the server's down, right? And so you're reading like no data from the server because the server's down. Then what are you going to do, right? Like you don't want to crash the app because of that. So instead you could instead you use like this guardlet just in case that happens.
Okay, and then bundle.main.path is like searching for the file.
Yeah, right, basically. You can look more into the documentation, but yeah, it returns the bundle object that contains current executable, aka movie parser.swift. But yeah. Yep. So yeah, like but yeah, basically more of the story, just read the documentation. If you're like confused on how to like, if you don't know how to like maybe like read a JSON file or something like that. Because I didn't know this off the top of my head either. So I just like went on Google, I Googled it and I got it off like either Stack Overflow or like the official documentation. Okay. All right, cool. So now we have the data that we want. And so I'm gonna go a little bit over time, but one thing I want to talk about is how, so we're getting this image and we want to display it. So how do we like, I guess like first it's an image base. It's like you have a URL for the image, but you don't really like have the image itself. You need to go to the URL to get the image. And so how do we do that? So that is all right, so in order to do that, you're gonna have to like make a call to that URL in order to get that data. And so how one does that is, I think there's like multiple packages online that basically allows you as a Swift user to like ping a URL without writing like 50 lines of code. And let me just pull up the documentation really quickly. Okay. So, or could you put it into assets? So you don't want JSON in your assets because I mean an asset is like technically like I don't know like an image usually. And if this wouldn't work, this function wouldn't work if it were like in the assets because it's technically not part of like the main path, right? It would be part of like the main path plus like slash assets like plus like movies.json. So yeah, but usually you don't want to use like JSON. You don't put JSON in your assets. You might put in like a different like data folder, for example, instead. Okay, so all right, so first let's try to all right, let's go to movie tail view control. Let's try to load the image that we want. Okay, so inside configure cell, let's say like cell dot what's it like poster, right? Poster. Dot image equals a like poster image, let's call it. And remember that inside movie parser, we're actually not storing an image, but we're storing like a URL to the image, right? So we're gonna need to convert that to a URL object first. So let's like make let image URL equals URL oops string movie dot image, and we're gonna make that an optional type just in case the image URL to that movie doesn't exist, right? Oops. Okay. And then let's try guard let data equals try data being the contents of image URLs. Once again, I don't know this off the top of my head, but if you look on the documentation online, like how to get an image from like a URL, or how to get data from a URL, if you Google that, this is what you'll find. And then let's try to safely unwrap that. And then, all right, so once that is done, let's say let poster image equals UI image data. Right. So like if I even get to line 55, as in if this returned as an exit early, then I will, oops, then like I know that the data is successfully gotten, it's not nil, and then I can like convert that to a UI image. What is movie dot I not have let's do this. Else, I don't know, like, oh, so we can't do return, so we just like print instead. Invalid, oops, image URL. And so that will throw us an error instead. All right, so then otherwise you get the poster image. And you set the cells dot poster dot image to the poster image. Else. Just so fatal error is like just shuts down the entire app. You shouldn't use it here, but I'm just doing it here just to like shut up the errors so I can run this and show you guys something. Okay, so let's try running this now. So nice. It actually loads. I didn't actually expect this to load. And I'll show you why. So let's say like instead of like reading like a fixed number of like movie images, right? Like you have like 100 or so, right? Or like yeah, I don't know, like hundreds or thousands. Images take up a lot of data, and so you would actually like find that when you try to load this, it would like take forever to load. Like your user would open your app and like they would just see like blank like purple like background for a while because it's trying to load all these images. And so and that's because your main UI or your main thread, which is a thread that controls what is shown on the screen, it's not gonna it's gonna lag behind the actual like grabbing of the data and like displaying it on the screen. And so usually what happens is like for in apps like for example like news, when you're trying to like know like the title image of like news article, what they do not have this piece of code there. They have it like modified a little. And so what they do is they use this thing called like a dispatch queue, and they essentially like assign different threads to do different things. So they'll assign like a global concurrent queue or like another thread that's running at the same time as main to like actually load the images. So by the time like the screen pulls up, like you will already have the image. And so this is hard to like, I guess like illustrate because we're working with a JSON file. And so like it's like you're not seeing the lag, but like don't worry, I've made this mistake before when I was first coding iOS apps where I was like trying to load like a bunch of images at once and like my screen was just blank, or it took like a minute for all the images to load because my I was telling the main thread to do too many things at once, as in I'm telling it to like pull image data from like this URL, but also to load it onto the screen before it's been pulled. And so what we want to do is we essentially want to like assign a background thread, but that's running in the same time as main though, to like pull these images so that main isn't overloaded by like different things, right? And I can illustrate that, annotate that in a sec. But this is essentially what the code would look like, and I'll push this and annotate this onto the GitHub afterwards, before like Blueprint actually starts tomorrow. So load image things. And sorry if this is going a little bit over time. Yeah, so here now you can use like return because you're in dispatch queue. But so basically I'm saying on the global thread, on a background thread, I am going to try to load this data. And then on the main thread, dispatch queue dot main dot async, I am going to handle this data, right? And I'm going to display it. And so this will actually load the images faster, or just like at all, if you're like actually pinging this from an API rather than like from like a JSON file that I'm doing. So yeah, let's resume this. What this line is doing is it's basically saying like how to scale the image. There's different ways to scale it: scale to fit or scale to fill. I just chose scale to fit. You can like play with that. It's not that essential right now. But okay, let's try this. I don't think it's doing it. Right, and so now you can see that, like, I don't know, the images popped up perhaps nanoseconds faster than they would have earlier, but like if you are thinking about like an app like Instagram, for example, that has to load like hundreds of images at a time, like those nanoseconds will become seconds very quickly. And so imagine opening up Instagram and like not seeing any images at once, or not any images. Like you would be pretty pissed, right? As like an Instagram user, you know? So yeah, that's why we do this. And like I said, this was like pretty cursory. You guys probably, let me just like go through one more thing as to how dispatch queues work. But just like imagine, right? You have like one thread, right? That's running, just like running the process, right? So let's call this the main thread. And like let's say you all of a sudden you task it with like a very, very heavy task, right? And you essentially like block this thread because it's like taking forever to process this task. Then like everything that comes afterwards, right? Like all these other tasks that it needs to do can't run, right? Because you're like currently working on like pulling like hundreds of images at once. And so right, and so what we do instead is what we're saying here with dispatch queue global is like we have like other threads that are all running at once, right? These are all like background threads. What we're saying is like bring this task and put it on a background thread, right? So then this blocking thing won't exist, right? And so it'll just like grab the images. So this background thread only has like one job right now, which is like to get these images. Oops. So right, so the background task now has just like one job, which is to grab, oh my God, which is to grab like the images. Okay, so it's like grab images, and they're all running at the same time, right? Which is what async means. It means like it's running concurrently. And so basically by the time we need this green stuff to run, like it'll just like send the images over, and now this stuff can run. Oops. All right, well, so now it can run and there is no lag. So there's no lag anymore. And then your users will be happy because they don't have to like see blank screens. So yeah, sorry, that was like a little cursory and we're a little over time, but that is all I have for iOS workshop. I will be releasing a document with like other cool packages and things you can do, like using camera, Bluetooth, bunch of other things, connecting your calendar. There's a lot you can do on iOS, as I'm pretty sure you guys all know by now. But yeah, thank you for like choosing this track, for listening to me lecture for like 5 hours. But yeah, hopefully you guys learned something. And like I said, I'll be releasing like the completed code with more documentation later tonight. So yeah, feel free to stay after if you have any questions. I'm gonna stop recording. So, oops, let me just